wholeness comes from the inside out.
When we're living congruently with our values, there's happiness because there is that sense of wholeness.
Wholeness is when the way of your being matches the truth of your being.
Jonice Webb, PhD, is a licensed psychologist and the recognized pioneer of the previously overlooked topic, childhood emotional neglect, or CEN. She is the best-selling author of the first books ever written about CEN, Running on Empty, Overcome Your Childhood Emotional Neglect, and Running on Empty No More, Transform Your Relationships with Your Partner, Your Parents, and Your Children.
Hello.
Hi.
I hope you weren't waiting too long. All of a sudden I looked down, I'm like, oh, right, it's changed. I have to do something more.
No, I just beamed in and then you beamed in.
Great.
So.
Great. I was just playing my Tetris for 1 minute while I was playing away. But I'm so grateful that you could join me today.
Probably
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. You have such a nice whole webpage and website. It's really nice.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. But first, how is your family, your loved ones doing during COVID? How has it been for you? Just on your own,
everybody's good.
Good.
Yeah, everybody's good, healthy so far. How about you?
Yeah, healthy so far. I feel a little guilty. It's been so nice to wind down and change gears a little bit. It's a little bit of a selfish moment for me because I've really enjoyed a minute being able to cook again and eat differently and not think about having to rush around. So it's been really great. So I appreciate it.
I was just thinking today about how hard it's going to be to switch back. I think you guys are going to do that before us because you're out in mountain time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to feel like I kind of don't want to go back to the running around.
Yeah, you don't know how happy that makes me feel because sometimes I think, am I a little crazy? Because I feel the same way. I'm going to miss it. It's just it's a simpler time that I think we will take for granted once we move back and get bustling. We will say, oh, wait, I hope we say, wait, maybe there were some things we could learn from that, or maybe there's some things we can do there, and I think one of them is we have this opportunity to really not distract ourselves from our thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And I think that's going to be good in the long run to kind of feel those for a minute. So anyway, we'll see.
I agree.
Well, I will start, and I'll do probably a voiceover as an introduction, but is there anything specifically that you want me to add to your introduction that you want to share?
I don't know what you have. Do you have the bio that's normally on things I do?
Yeah, I can. Yep. Yeah. Does that work for you? Yeah. That's great. So, and I just want you to know, so a little bit of a background for me. So it was great in about December, probably about July, August last year, my husband kind of we've got to go to counseling or we're not going to make it. Right. So and there was definitely things needing to work on, but, so by December, he said to our therapist, who's so good, so do you recommend a book? What book can you help? Because he's one that really likes books. And so Running on Empty was one that she recommended, which I had bought 2 or 3 years before and thought, hey, what do you think about reading this book?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been, he went on a hike and it has to be mid-December. And just a few memories hit, it just hits in a certain way where you say, oh, that's what that was, And it has been such a revolutionary idea because I, as a spouse, and come in as an in-law and you see something's a little off, I would explain it as there's an elephant in the room nobody is talking about. But I couldn't even name what it was. There was nothing to say. There was nothing to point out. Well, that did it justice, and so that's why listening to this book for me was helpful for me to say it does have a name, that elephant does have a name. I don't know what it is. It's just there. And so it's been really good. And something I wanted to ask you even before we get started was, so one thing that was interesting for my husband is the way it showed up for him was like his faith or his religious thing broke off. And his therapist said, a lot of times when you learn your parents aren't capable of taking care of you, you might go somewhere else. And then when he got involved with the real people that he was dealing with in the church, and they were real valuable people that were mean too, that's when it kind of all broke. Have you ever heard of that before happening? Where they take on a surrogate, whether it's a professor, something else that becomes almost a surrogate parent that they do depend on. Is that familiar at all to you?
So you mean people who grow up emotionally neglected, do they end up attaching to someone who actually does give them that emotional attention?
Or at least they expect it to, yeah. I mean, or they've given the responsibility of the parent over to someone else as far as you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that's really very common because everyone feels something missing. Everyone just has that natural need to be validated and seen on a deep level. And if your parents can't give it to you, you're going to look for it. And people have it sounds like he used a pretty healthy way of looking for it. A lot of people end up going towards drugs or sex or whatever to try to fill themselves up.
Mm-hmm. True. And a lot of people have said that, how are you not addicted as much as you should, as much as you should be. That was even before we understood about emotional neglect, because there was just this missing piece that is so well said and done in your book. So anyway, but to get started, at the beginning of your book, I loved how you came about it through your own work, that you started to see a pattern in your own sessions. And what was that like in the beginning? And what were some things that would come up and make you question and think?
Well, part of what helped is that I worked in so many different settings with so many different types of people, including, addicted people with major mental illnesses. And at the time, I was in my own private practice working with more kind of worried well types of folks. And but all across the board, I had been hearing from different people, each of which used different words, but they were essentially expressing that feeling like something was missing inside of them. Some of them said they felt numb. Some people said they felt empty. Some people said they felt like something was missing in them that other people had. So there were all different kinds of words that people used. But along with that came this general sense of lack of fulfillment, a feeling like other people are living this full life and I'm just like they're living in color and I'm in black and white. What's going on here? And that's what I kept seeing over and over again. And also in people who claimed that they had a pretty good childhood. A lot of them, not all of them, of course, but and that was really puzzling because their childhood, how we look in the childhood for explanations for things. And many of them, it was hard to find. And a lot of them had been to therapists before who tried to help them find some kind of trauma or abuse that could explain why they were struggling so much as adults and couldn't find any. So that was when I started to think maybe the issue is not something that happened to them when they were growing up, but something that failed to happen for them when they were growing up. Mm. And that was having their emotions seen and heard and validated. And what I was realizing was you can grow up in the most materially comfortable, loving household, but if your parents avoid or fail to notice or don't validate your feelings, it will leave a mark on you. And that was, I just realized it was childhood emotional neglect. And then I realized I have to bring this to the attention of people because it's so important.
Mhm. You referenced maybe for a little bit in there is, you know, in the, was it the 50s and 60s, the still face experiment, you know, is that related to, is that the kind of thing that we're talking about, the still face? And if you want to explain that a little bit, I'll let you do that. But is that kind of a huge, like, visual experiment about what this really means to not have that emotional, you know, reaction and comfort from a parent?
Great question. And yes and no is the answer. And so what the still faced, it was this big experiment that has been replicated a few different times. And what they do is they show, there's a video on YouTube that I usually share whenever I do presentations. And in the video, a mother is playing with a toddler, you know, really involved, really connected, and the toddler's laughing, and they're just, you know, connecting the way a parent-child should. And then the mother turns away from the child for just a minute and turns back with a very blank face and sits in front of the child with a very blank face. And you watch the infant. It's actually heartbreaking.
It is.
Especially for people who grew up with too much of this, which is childhood emotional neglect. You watch the child literally fall apart trying to desperately get the mother to show some response. So she's not looking mean. She's not looking angry. She's just blank. And this throws the child into great distress to the point that eventually they start crying and tantruming. So what those videos show is how impactful it is when a child has emotional attunement and how impactful it is when it's withdrawn. The reason I said yes and no instead of just yes is because that child had it and then it was like abruptly, very obviously withdrawn. But the people who are the most greatly affected by childhood emotional neglect are the ones who grow up in households where that kind of attunement is so rare or watered down that they virtually never get the really rich interaction. Or if they do, it's very intermittent and unpredictable. So that there's just this constant lack of emotional connection and attunement and joy in the family. And you can't remember that. You can't remember what didn't happen and what wasn't there. And that's what gives it so much of its power over our adult lives.
Right. I think it's so important for people to understand this. What would you say is the relationship between the mind and the thoughts and your feelings? How would you describe those things in this reference with emotional neglect? How does that work in the mind of one that doesn't know their feelings?
Mm-hmm. It's my point of view, and this is never, I guess you can't really prove how all of this interacts.
Right.
There's a lot of research coming from a lot of different directions on that.
Right.
But generally, our feelings are the most basic part of who we are. Mm-hmm. They're wired into our brain, the base of our brain, and we can't choose them. They're automatic. They just come and they go, and they come and they go. We don't get to choose what we feel. So they are the most biologically personal expression of who we are. And it's what we do with those feelings that determines who we become. So we're all going to get feelings. There's no stopping it. We can stop ourselves from experimenting them, which we'll probably talk about in a minute. But from experiencing them is what I meant to say.
Yeah.
But we can't stop ourselves from having them because they're so wired in. It's like trying to stop the sun from coming up. It's just going to. But then we're all responsible for our feelings because our feelings can make us do things we shouldn't do, or they can stop us from doing things that we should do. And so we're all responsible for taking a hold of those feelings, being aware of them, managing them, and they're incredibly useful. So we can use our feelings if we know what to do with them and if we're aware of them. And that all involves the mind and the brain. It's a combination of mindfulness, being aware of what's going on in your body at any given time, being able to name that and be aware of, figure out why this feeling is coming right now. What does it mean? And what is my body telling me by sending me this feeling, and what can I do with it that will make me a better person?
Mhm.
So feelings are very enriching, but they can also take you astray if you let them.
I gave a talk last year, and I talked about, I came across this documentary on President Garfield and how he was assassinated, and how at the time the germ theory was not accepted in science. It had been 50 years, of back and forth, but we can see it, we don't know what it is. And so it hadn't been an accepted theory, but very few people were starting to really understand the idea of washing hands, right? That became a new thing. And so in the end, when he was shot and killed and they probed, and, they used to, the doctor used to, the more wear you had on your tools and instruments, the better and more experienced you were. So they did not want shiny, clean, new instruments. And so they would use these instruments to probe into this gunshot wound, and after a few months, he died. They opened him up. He was full of infection, and it really made an impact on the way that medicine looked at the germ theory. And I related that to our emotions now. The emotions have kind of just been something they're just over here, and my point was saying we need a process, a simple process like washing our hands, to look at these emotions and these feelings, because they are affecting us in much the same way as germs are. And isn't it fitting at this time that we're talking about a virus
Yes, it really is.
caused everybody to do that? But that just spoke to me. So I just, when I'm listening to this talk about that in the documentary, I was just glued, because I saw how we were repeating that pattern with emotions. And I get that, like you said, I get that it's not, some entity we can look at under a microscope, and they couldn't either. Maybe someday we will. That'd be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it really would.
But the idea that the effect it has on us is so great that we have to find a process to really, and I don't know exactly, it was almost a call for something, but it's like, we've got to pay attention to this part of who we are. This emotional part of who we are affects the other parts, our physical body, and our mental body, as far as how we think about the world, and our spiritual body, which I consider, our connection with other people, and with, this connection we have. The emotions are just so under like looked at, and not made to be important. And I even gave the idea, I said, when a little child falls down and gets hurt and they cry, they have an emotion about it. I said, I don't know if the pain of falling down is less as we're an adult. The physical pain is less. However, we have decided we've got to calm ourselves down and not have an emotion about it. I mean, it's that rampant in just everyday life, let alone somebody that's been emotionally neglected. So I could see how it would be easy for a parent to emotionally neglect with some of these messages that we're, that we just accept as true, that, you don't cry. I mean, a woman would never cry in a business sense, don't have an emotion, there's all these kind of underlying rules that we have that I don't know if maybe we need to rethink about that. I don't have the answer, but I just know that emotion is key. And so I loved, but talking about that,
Can I just say one thing in response to what you just
yes, please.
said?
Yeah.
It was so important. Just that society really has viewed emotions as a sign of weakness, and especially men have not been allowed to show the full range of emotions, and I think are taught to really suppress themselves, but women as well. And the thing that gets really lost there is how incredibly useful our feelings are. They are what connect us, they're what drives us, they're what motivates us, directs us, guides us. If we know how to use our emotions, we have an incredible tool for life versus how society really has painted them for years as a sign of something to hide and a sign of weakness.
I agree. And in the front of, I think it's even in the introduction of your book, I think here at home, we have probably sent this quote to a number of people to just, this is it. This is the quote of the century, but many fine, high functioning, capable people secretly feel unfulfilled or disconnected. Shouldn't I be happier? Why haven't I accomplished more? Why doesn't my life feel more meaningful? These are questions which are often prompted by the invisible force at work, which, that's what the germ theory, this is the emotion theory, this invisible force that is affecting us, that is just the crux of this book. And probably your work from that point on is just this invisible force that we need to look at as a very, very powerful force. And you talked about earlier that that this is that our emotions are the deepest part of who we are. And I loved on page, I think it was 120. Feelings are the most basic part of who we are, more than our thoughts. They're a physiological, I loved that, a physiological part of our body.
Mm-hmm.
And of course that speaks to me. Like the fingernails and knees, our emotions cannot be erased and will not be denied any more than we can deny our hunger or thirst, our elbows or our earlobes. I agree. I was telling it was funny going back and highlighting these. I said, I've kind of repeated that to myself or of myself. The other day I told my daughter, I said, it's kind of like if you breathed in a balloon of helium and then I expected you to speak with a deep, deep voice. That's how these things, whether they're hormones or whether they're emotions, these things work within our body. They are very powerful and we need to work with them. And so how do you see that as being the most basic part of who we are? Like, where does your mind go when you wrote that piece and research that you've done?
I was literally thinking about the physiological, because they literally are physiological, and this is backed by all kinds of science. They're wired into, we know what the neurons are that help us feel emotions, and we know what the neurochemicals are. We found those neurons in people's guts. They're not just in our brains. They go all the way down into our guts. And when you have a feeling, it is in your body. And a lot of people don't realize this, that emotions are physical experiences, and you can locate them in your body. And when you start to think about them this way, it kind of helps, because if you're someone who grew up in an emotionally neglectful family, and you basically had to wall your feelings off, which is causes all the problems when you go into your adulthood. It's basically the source of all the problems. But if your feelings are walled off, then you may not be aware with your head that you're having them. But I have yet to meet a person who wasn't actually having the feelings. And when you start to try to actually connect with them, they are there. And then you can learn all kinds of amazing things about what to do with them. But they are literally in our cells.
Like the sensations, they give a sensation in the body. Is that how you would describe it? I mean, when you feel it, like physically, like a sensation.
Yes. Yes. And in fact, this, the name, I named both of my books Running on Empty, Running on Empty and Running on Empty No More. And the reason I use the word empty is because empty is one of the primary feelings that people who grew up emotionally neglected end up feeling. And emptiness, I've heard it described by so many different people. Some people feel it in their belly. Some people feel it in their chest. Some people feel it in their throat. Some people, it can be anywhere in your body, but it's just this feeling that something's missing that is supposed to be there. So everybody's different in where they might feel a feeling. but they still are physical, still in your body.
A while back, I had lost some weight, and so I started people wanting me to help them lose weight,
Mm-hmm.
and I realized one day I was sitting there in bed going, how come I can't just give this recipe to someone else and they not, that recipe does not work for them, and it was a crazy idea. But just the idea that we look at the physical and the only thing we treat is the physical, the physical body in weight loss. But what if it was in another part of this? What if those existed? And I don't know how physical that is, but so I really started to understand that physical sensations, the communicator, the body, to me, the physical body, I call it the communicator for these other parts of who we are in the sensations. And we numb off that communicator so often that no wonder why we're not getting the messages, and how important it is to connect in with those physical sensations and learn for yourself what those physical sensations mean. Because like you say, they're different for different people. But such a learning experience to learn to listen and talk to your own body.
Absolutely, yes. People who grow up with emotional neglect and wall off their feelings really they can end up making all sorts of decisions that are not the best decisions for themselves, choosing the wrong career, marrying the wrong person, choosing the wrong place to go live, and then finding themselves, wait, what am I doing here? Wait, what am I doing with this person? What am I doing in this career? Mm-hmm. And if they had been raised in a household that was paying attention to their feelings and teaching them that their feelings mattered, that they were valuable, that they were important, and how to manage them, they would have been much more connected to their inner selves and much better able to make good decisions for themselves. Because just think about if you choose to do something and you get this happy feeling from it, it tells you to do more of that. If you do choose something and it feels uncomfortable or weird, it's your body saying, don't do this, don't go that way. So those are really valuable messages for helping us all get to where, to live our best authentic life.
For sure. And I love, I did a note. The emotions are the body's way of communicating with us, you say, in running on empty and driving us to do things. People who were emotionally neglected were trained to try and erase, deny, push, underground, and in some cases be ashamed of their invaluable built-in system. Emotions can do a variety of things. And so when those emotions get pushed down, you talk about the different ways that they show up. So instead of reading the list, what are the ways that what happens when these emotions go down? What does that look like to the person? How do they feel?
So emotions never actually go away. They just go underground and they sit there and they wait for something in your current life to touch them off. So if something happens, if you lose a parent, for example, as a child, and no one grieves with you and acknowledges your grief enough and works with you enough on recovering from that grief, you'll end up having to just wall it off in order to get by. And so you wall it off, but then as an adult, anything that might threaten, that might feel like it's a threat that you're going to lose something, or if you do lose something or someone, you might be very easily set off to a deep feeling of grief, even by much smaller losses as an adult, because that deep pool of repressed, walled off grief is still sitting there and it's just waiting for something to touch it off. So if your repressed feeling is anger, for example, you might be prone to eruptions, or you might be completely incapable of feeling anger at all. And that's not good either, because we need our anger. It tells us to protect ourselves, right? Or you might be completely incapable of feeling sadness because you've got your grief so walled off that you can't feel these feelings. Doesn't mean they're not there. It just means they're walled off.
Mm-hmm.
Some people get physical illness. There has been research on how repressed feelings affect our health, causing heart problems, blood pressure, backaches, headaches, neck aches, all kinds of different problems that it can cause. I really feel like a lot of people who end up in addictions are driven there by their combination of their walled off feelings and the emptiness that they experience as adults.
Without a doubt. One of the genius I loved about this book too is that I loved the way you came up with the scenario of speaking of someone who did receive the emotional support and then going into all these different scenarios in contrast to that, so it made it so easy to recognize where things hit you as you're listening, where, oh, that kind of showed up. I can recognize where that showed up, where I could see that in my life. And I also thought, so that was great to be able to really get an understanding of all the different ways this can happen. And you were so good at being respectful and kind toward the parents, and letting these kids, letting us adults, children be, to recognize that they were doing what they needed to do or what they could do, and in such a respectful way. I think that was really, helps the adult to accept the information in just a little bit easier way, that they could see themselves and understand that. How did you come up with all those scenarios? I mean, how did you come up with the different ways of that emotional neglect happens? That was so thorough, I thought.
Really, it just came from the hundreds of people that I've talked with about emotional neglect and the different experiences that I've heard, childhood stories of how people's parents dealt with certain situations or didn't deal with them. It just kind of paints a picture of there are so many different kinds of families that this happens in, and so many different ways that it can happen. It can be loving parents. It can be parents who are really struggling and working several jobs trying to put food on the table. It could be a parent who's depressed, a parent who's grieving themselves. And but none of those are a sentence for emotionally neglecting a child. It really, I think the biggest ingredient is a parent who grew up without their own emotions validated when they were a child. I call that the well-meaning but neglected themselves parent, or the WMBNT for short, because it takes so long to say it. But I think the world is filled with these parents who are just lovely people, yet they don't know what they're feeling when they're feeling it, because they weren't taught that as a child. They have a blind spot to emotions, and so they can't see their children's emotions either. So no matter how much you love a child, if you're not seeing their feelings and responding to them and validating them, they will grow up in some way feeling not validated, not loved, and not seen. And that's the big important missing piece in childhood emotional neglect.
And another part of your book that was so helpful is that you give actual help. You're not just passing on information, but you have beautiful worksheets and your websites there to support people to actually work through this. And that is so helpful. And all your different resources are so helpful. So what are some of the tips for working through our emotions or understanding them, or so we'll start there, and then we'll go into if you're emotionally neglected, that kind of changes some things, right? So just how do we, as everyday people, how do we work with our emotions and understand them better? What are some tips and tools for that?
So the first and the most key thing to do is to start trying to think of your own emotions as in a different way, as a really helpful tool that you want to welcome back, as opposed to something that you want to avoid. So once you make that key change and you really wrap your head around wanting to feel, it makes a big change in you. And then it's a matter of starting to really pay attention to your body, and asking yourself, what am I feeling? And I have an exercise to do that called the identifying and naming, where you focus inward and you pay attention to what you're feeling. And then you ask yourself a series of questions to try to sort through and identify a feeling, increasing your emotion vocabulary so that you have the words to name. There's so much power in naming a feeling. And if you grew up in a household that didn't really talk about feelings, you may not have very many feeling words. It doesn't matter how educated or smart you are. You may only know like 10 emotion words. And there are hundreds and hundreds of valuable emotion words. So just becoming familiar and welcoming to your own feelings and starting to consciously try to feel is an amazingly powerful step to take. It's easier for some than for others. And I think it helps to really be more focused on the trying to feel a feeling than it is to be focused on whether you succeed or not. Mm-hmm. Because as I tell my clients and people in my Fuel Up for Life program, is that every time you do the identifying and naming and you try to feel feeling, you're knocking a brick out of the wall that's blocking you. You're taking a chip out of it at least. And so you may not feel something, but that's okay. You just took a chip out of the wall, and you just have to keep chipping through. Mm-hmm. And eventually you'll start feeling something. Mm-hmm. And the people who don't give up are the ones who really, end up having success with this.
And so you mentioned are you seeing clients individually anymore, or are you working in groups? How can people get help from you besides your wonderful book, which is so well done?
So I do see some clients, but not that many. And I only do before the pandemic. I only saw people in my office, and I'm going to continue that afterwards too. I don't want to, go into online work. So that is why I created the online program, is so that people could go through the steps of CEN recovery with my help and with the support of a community of people who are going through it with them, and take these steps of getting in touch with their feelings and learning what to do with those feelings on their own time, wherever they're located.
So what is your thoughts about, with an emotionally neglected person or an adult, are they able to pick up on mirror neutron or mirror, because, I've come to where, I can understand someone I'm communicating with so much inside my body, and I can feel them almost. And is that something that they can learn? Does that help them to be with somebody and feel their emotions, or can they not even go there within themselves? How does that affect them? I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Are you asking, is it possible for them to get to a point of feeling other people's feelings?
Well, I guess so. Or like, if is the feeling so blocked off within themselves that they can't even, see it within someone else as well? Is it hard for them to recognize?
I see.
Yeah.
I see a lot of variation with that. So some people whose own feelings are walled off are extremely attentive to other people's and responsive to other people's. And that's because they're so walled off to themselves that they're literally living for other people. They're really unaware of themselves and their own needs and their own feelings and what they want, because they're so out of touch. They're so walled off inside. But with other people, they are right there trying to help everybody get everything they want, because they're so tuned in to everyone else's needs and wants and feelings. And then there are also people who are very out of tune with themselves because they have this wall, but that wall blocks them from being able to, just because they never learned the emotion skills, what to do with feelings, how to name them, how to recognize them. They can't see them in others either. And so most people everyone seems to be one or the other of those. There's not a whole lot in between.
Interesting.
Emotionally neglected.
Wow, interesting. Well, I think that you will be seen as a pioneer in emotions. I think you will be, I see it so much like the germ theory, you know, that eventually in a hopefully not too long, that this idea of emotions, how important emotions are and in our lives, I hope that we can find that becomes a new understanding of how we even work with children, how we work with each other in business, how we work, you know, with each other, that emotions, those feelings, you know, become something that we look at and think of as so important. And I think that it is so great to have someone to call it out and name it. Something you're naming the unnameable. And that I can sense in reading and listening to the book, I have both, that was a kind of a leap of faith for you to name something that was not quite there. And so I have such gratitude for you and really commend you for speaking out on something that was unspoken of before. And I even loved how you called it, it's the invisible force. You let it be what it really was. And I really think it will, I think it would spark, I think every American should read this book just to help them recognize how important that it is that we have these conversations about our emotions and that we know what they are and that we pay attention to the way our emotion affects us differently than maybe someone else. I think I'm just in awe about how well this book was put together. And then you've got a new book that is almost like it's like a workbook. Would you say that kind of a how-to, your latest book?
Actually, it's about dealing with childhood emotional neglect in your relationships.
Oh, the newest one. Yeah.
With your parents and your spouse and your children. So it's it's divided into 3 sections, and it's all about how to deal with your parents once you realize they emotionally neglected you, because it kind of changes everything.
Yes.
And then the second part is how to enrich and deepen your marriage using, starting to use your emotions in a different way in that relationship. And then the third is how to make sure you don't pass childhood emotional neglect down to your kids, because unless you consciously make sure you don't, it will happen.
Yeah. And I think we're several generations into that. So we've got to now rewind the clock and
got to dig ourselves back out.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Well, is there anything more that you would like to make sure? I want to make sure you get what you would like to talk about on and get that out. So is there anything else that you want to talk about? Anything coming up or anything you want to promote even? We're happy to do that.
I should mention that I have an emotional neglect questionnaire, because since emotional neglect is a non-event, it's what your parents fail to do for you. Most people who have childhood emotional neglect can't remember it and don't believe that it ever happened to them. So the emotional neglect questionnaire is on my website, and it's very easy to find on emotionalneglect.com. You just sign up. You'll actually receive my newsletter too, which has lots of great resources in it. And then you can take the questionnaire, and if you score 6 or above, it's an indication that you probably grew up with some amount of emotional neglect. And some people who take that say, I can't imagine how you made this questionnaire without having known the inside of my head for my entire life. And other people, don't feel quite that. So I think it's a good determiner on how much you may have grown up with and how much it's affecting you as an adult. So I encourage people, anyone who's wondering about themselves, to take that. And, I also have lots of blog posts, and I teach therapists as well how to treat childhood emotional neglect. And there's a list on my website of therapists who are trained. So if anyone's listening and wants to find a therapist to help them, take a look at that on my website too.
Oh, good. That's what I was just going to ask next. I'm like, what do they do next? So that's a great resource for people to, and now that so used to telehealth, maybe they don't need to be right in your backyard. Maybe we could just, maybe you can actually get to one of these therapists if they're not close to you, which would be fantastic. Because I think it takes a special therapist to be delicate with these emotionally neglected adults. I think there's so much compassion that needs to be taken care of, especially like you say, if they've moved into any kind of addiction, that takes a whole different way of working with them. Would you agree?
Yes. I mean, addiction is kind of a special case for sure, but being aware of emotional neglect from childhood and being able to teach the emotion skills is a key part of recovery for sure.
Mm. Well, I appreciate you being and taking your time with me today. I was so excited. I couldn't hardly sleep last night. I was so excited for today.
So sweet.
Because I'm telling you, that you are a pioneer. You're going to be one of the remembered when it finally comes out that emotion plays such an important role in our experience, and that it's something that we should have been paying attention to all along. I think we're right on the cusp of that, and your work is instrumental in helping the ones that have no reference to even begin, because those of us that have a reference, we haven't been taught either. We've been nurtured, but we haven't been taught how to take care of our emotions or what they need, or, did you feel that right there? That's what that means. We're left to figure it out on our own. And I wonder why. I question that, and everybody's different. I get that, but I think it's time that we bring some education into our feelings and emotions kind of to the forefront. I think it could lead to the other parts of our lives being a little, I think that, like you say, they're such a messenger for us. It would really help to know where to go to school or what job to take. It helps in these kind of decisions. It's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big deal. So thank you so much for
make childhood emotional neglect a household term. Just like everyone knows what child abuse is.
Yeah.
I want everyone to know what childhood emotional neglect is. And I think when that happens, the world will be different.
I agree. And any way that the Wholeness Network could help you do that, we would love that. So we will spread your message however you would like to, because I agree 100%. I think it's bigger. I think it's really at the base and cause of all of our bigger issues. I really think it's a big part of our experience. I do an unsaid and untreated portion of our society. So thank you so much for being brave enough to speak it, to call the unknown into existence so that we can begin to look at it and appreciate it. And at the end of your book, I loved you said, it sounded like, you kind of wrote this book and now you're hoping some scientific studies could be done, and you gave some ways that could happen. Has that happened? Has there been some scientific studies that have come out of your book?
I think it's just a hard subject to study because it's a non-event, and how do you do research on a non-event? There have been some people in various parts of the world using the emotional neglect questionnaire in their research. And there was a big study done at Duke University on how neglect affects the brains of children once they grow into adolescence. So there's definitely some more things happening when it comes to emotional neglect.
Good. I'm so grateful. Well, I think I've tried to wind up 3 times, then I come up with another question because I'm just having so much fun, because I appreciate having an academic speak the same language that I see, that I experience and I see, and that I in some ways intuit has been there, and so to have somebody give me a name, it's been so nice. So I appreciate you taking your time. I hope everything continues to go well with your family during COVID. And I hope that we can share your message and get this out. Like you say, make it a household name. Childhood neglect, emotional childhood neglect is such an integral part of our experience as children that needing to be paid attention to. And so I just am so grateful for your work. And anytime you want to share or come back, reach out. And like I say, we would love to help share your message, and we'll do whatever we can to support you and your work. I love it. I love it. I love it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your support very, very much. I really do. It was really fun talking with you today.
Thank you so much. I will let you go. Thank you for your time. And again, I hope you have just a fabulous day.
Me too. Stay safe and healthy.
You too. We'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.